The larch tree is a tree that grows in this country, mostly out west. It's a rare combination of a conifer tree, that's a tree that produces cones, a cone-bearing tree, and oftentimes it has needles instead of leaves. But it's also deciduous, which means it loses, in this case, its needles in the fall and lies dormant in the winter. Most conifers we know here in Indiana are evergreens, including several that we have on our campus here. A deciduous tree would be what we'd be familiar with, our typical maple and oak trees, among many. The deciduous trees can't grow in the winter cold, so they drop their leaves to minimize their exposure to insects and fire. Advent is our time to be like larch trees. We lose our prickly needles and drop our pretenses to be softened by the mystery of the God who came gently into our midst as a precious infant, like all of us began our own earthly existence. But we also expose ourselves to the cold, harsh reality that we are still works in progress, that we have more growth to undergo, that we are waiting for more light and warmth from God, whose love ever expands our own hearts to love others. We should not be afraid of growth and thus change in our lives. It was Paul's prayer to the Philippians in our second reading that they constantly grow in their faith, that the one who began a good work in you will continue to complete it, and that your love may increase ever more and more. This prayer for them, and thus the prayer we make for each other, was so hopeful because it filled Paul not with angst for them, but filled him with joy. In our first reading, the prophet Baruch has a book that's written for those still in the midst of the Babylonian exile. There are people living away from their homeland, completely out of their comfort zone, totally reliant on God's grace for survival, and yet daring to hope for an eventual return to home. The focal point is Jerusalem, which the prophet commands to take off your robe of mourning and misery and put on the splendor of glory from God forever. At times we feel like our lives are in exile. Things are out of place. Nothing's going right. We're not in a space in our lives where we feel at home. Most of us probably feel settled in some parts of our life, but feeling like strangers in a foreign land in other parts of our lives. Both Baruch and John the Baptist remind us that we are to call upon the Lord, who will fill in the valleys and lower the mountains and make a smooth, straight highway on which we can find our God, or even better, as Baruch says, we may advance secure in the glory of God. Note that the Lord, it's the Lord. It's the Lord who's grinding down the hills, backfilling the lowlands, paving over the rough ways. Advent's probably better thought of as our time to give God the space and the time to do his thing. This certainly takes patience, which is one of the virtues that this season of preparation invites us to exercise. I find that patience needs to be combined with hope. When we employ these two virtues together, we can better be able to wait for whatever the Holy Spirit is developing in us, because we're confident of the final outcome. We can be patient, and because we have hope. The dying and rising of the Paschal mystery is more like the cycle of a deciduous tree, but dying, waiting, then springing to even more life. One way to practice this in our daily lives is to make sure that we're oriented in a hopeful manner to Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem, our final destination, and to put a little of this Advent/winter cycle into the midst. So, for example, can we wait a little bit to really consider if that gift we want to buy for someone is really what they need and within our budget? Or are we swept up in a shopping frenzy and lots of impulse buying? Can we be more mindful? Can we more mindfully consider what we eat and drink in these few weeks? Certainly enjoying the holidays, but also maybe with a little more moderation. Can we slow down all the activities in our lives and maybe even say no to some things in order to have the time and energy for God and prayer and for the people we're most responsible to care for? Many ways in which we patiently wait and become more receptive to Christ in our lives runs counter to the greater culture. But I would suggest this gives us an opportunity to stand out and be a contrast to a season that can otherwise produce oftentimes a lot of exhaustion and emptiness. In 2011, after harvesting timber from his Oregon property, the owner decided to do something fun as he replanted his land on a hillside with a new set of seedling trees. In the middle of his Douglas fir trees, he carefully planted larch trees in a large circle with two smaller circles and a crescent of fir trees inside of that circle. Now, every fall, as the larch trees' needles turn a bright yellow, and before they fall off, you can drive down Oregon Highway 18 and see the world's largest yellow smiley face on the side of the hill. When we give God space, even in the times we feel exiled and distant, and orient ourselves towards Jerusalem, letting our lives be led by hope, we will feel the face of God smiling on our heart. Because that's where Jesus dwells within us. And then, knowing that the Lord has done great things for us, and that we are filled with joy, we can easily share that joy with others. And that through us, all flesh will see the salvation of God.